Well, good evening, everybody in Australia, and good morning, everybody in Israel and in Germany. This is a great pleasure for the Israeli Embassy, the Zionist Federation of Australia, and the German Embassy to do this kind of joint collaboration with this important webinar that actually talks about important, relevant issue that we all discussing during our daily life and work. Everybody speaks about recently about the working definition of anti-Semitism as defined by the International Holocaust Remember Alliance. And this is a very good opportunity and very important opportunity to discuss that issue and the new dangers of modern anti-Semitism according to the definition of IHRA, but in general terms. I'm Gerstenfeld, I'm the interim ambassador of Israel to Australia. We have a great pleasure to host a very, very important speakers today that Yossi from Zionism Victoria, the new president of Zionism Victoria, will present in a minute. Again, thank you very much for the speakers, from Ambassador Küchler and Professor Dina Porat from Yad Vashem. Thank you, Zionist Federation and German Embassy. It is my pleasure. I hope you all have a fruitful webinar that will lead to many more collaboration between our organization in order to have the knowledge how we can fight together against this terrible phenomenon of anti-Semitism, discrimination, and hatred that we all want to stop. Thank you very much. Please begin.
Thank you, Ron. And I'd also like to thank both the Israeli embassies and the German embassies for arranging this discussion this evening. It should prove to be a very interesting evening as we explore issues around anti-Semitism and the International Holocaust Remembrance Association. We're very fortunate to have a number of honored guests with us who are joining online with us. You won't be able to see them, but we know that they're there, including some members of Parliament, Bert Van Manen, George Christensen, Senator Deborah O'Neill, and Senator Erica Betts. We're also lucky to have with us in the audience, and maybe we'll find some questions from them, the Australian delegates to the International Holocaust Remembrance Association, including Andre Oboler, who's also the president of the Jewish Community Council here in Victoria, Susan Rutland, Donna Lee Fries, Sue Hampel, and Pauline Rockman. We've put aside an hour and 15 or 20 minutes or so to run this session this evening. We'll break it up into two parts. We'll start with a general discussion between myself and Ambassador Kushla and Dina Porat about the work of IHRA, or the International Holocaust Remembrance Association, which we'll probably refer to as IHRA during the course of the discussion. We'll explore a few topics with them, and then about halfway through, we'll open up to questions from you, the people watching online at the moment. So you can, if you don't wish to, you can either use the raise your hand function in Zoom to identify yourself, and then you can ask your question and appear on camera. If you don't wish to appear on camera, or if you just prefer to type, there's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screens where you'll be able to put in a question, and then we'll be able to respond to them in that way. So before we commence, I'd just like to introduce our honored guests. Our first guest is Ambassador Michaela Kushla from Germany. Michaela is the current president of IHRA, but she also has a long and distinguished diplomatic career working in Germany. Her CV is very long, so I'll read out what are some of the highlights of that. She has served in the German embassies in both Prague and Santiago, so I'm guessing that in addition to both English and German, she probably speaks a bit of Spanish and a bit of Czech. She has been the permanent she has been part of the permanent representation of Germany to the EU. She's worked in the Federal Chancellery as the head of division coordination with the European Union member states. She's worked in the Office of the Federal President as the Head of Divisions, European Affairs, Deputy Director General for Foreign Affairs, European Policy Advisor of the Federal President. She's worked in the German Federal Foreign Office in both as an advisor on European Union law and coordination and advice on European legal matters, as well as heading up the division that looks at bilateral relations with France, the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, and Monaco. Currently, her position, in addition to being president of IHRA, she is the special representative for relations with Jewish organizations, issues relating to anti-Semitism, international Sinti and Roma affairs, and Holocaust remembrance. I'm sure you will agree she is well qualified to speak with us this evening, and we're very fortunate to have her. We're equally fortunate to have Professor Dina Porat with us from, I'm presuming you're in Jerusalem, Dina. I didn't actually check. You can let us know if they're wrong, but Dina is the head of the Cantor Center for the Study of Contemporary European Jewry, and she served as the head of the Department for Jewish History of the Rosenberg School for Jewish Studies, and as the incumbent of the Alfred P. Slaner Chair in Anti-Semitism and Racism, all at Tel Aviv University. Well, there you go, maybe she's in Tel Aviv. She serves as the Yad Vashem Chief Historian since 2010. Then has also been awarded prizes for her many publications, including the National Jewish Book Award for her biography of Abba Kovner, which was published by Stanford University Press, and the Bahat Prize for her new book on Jewish revenge after the Second World War. She was Tel Aviv University's Faculty of Humanities Best Teacher for 2004 and received the Raoul Wallenberg Medal in 2012. She's also served as an expert on the Israeli Foreign Ministry delegations to the United Nations World Conferences, and importantly, especially for this discussion this evening, she's been the academic advisor of the International Task Force for IHRA, and has also consulted with IHRA, particularly around the working definition of anti-Semitism. So, Ambassador Kushla, Dina Porat, welcome, and thank you very much for joining us here this evening.
Thank you. Thank you for the kind words.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, and good evening to Australia.
Yes, good evening, good morning to you, and good afternoon to anyone who is sort of halfway between Germany and Australia, and I won't even hazard a guess as to the proper greeting for people who might be in the Americas. Ambassador Kushla, let's start the discussion with you. Germany obviously holds the rotating chair of IHRA at the moment for the current year, and I'm sure that's a great opportunity for Germany to invest itself in the work of the body, as I'm sure it's done beforehand as well. But as you're sort of in your presidency, I just thought we'd start by asking, what are your goals for the presidency? What have you achieved, and what work do you still have to do?
Yeah, well, thank you. Well, actually, I speak a little Czech and I speak fluent Spanish. I speak a little Czech because my father was fluent in Czech and my grandfather was fluent in Czech. They were both born in, at the time, Czechoslovakia. So there is a connection to the country. Germany at the moment holds 3 presidencies. The presidency in the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, the IHRA, the presidency in the European Union until the end of December, and as from 18th November, the presidency in the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe. The Council of Europe is the bigger organization, including countries like Turkey, Azerbaijan, Armenia, or Georgia. And what we have been trying to do is to create synergies between these 3 presidencies, especially working on the issue of anti-Semitism. But coming back to your question on the goals we have set ourselves for the IHRA, there was one goal which was which we have already achieved, fortunately, with the help of the other 33 member states of the IHRA. That is the adoption of a non-legally binding working definition of anti-Gypsyism, anti-Roma discrimination. That happened on the 8th of October. So now the IHRA has 3 working definitions, one on Holocaust distortion and denial, 2013, one on anti-Semitism, 2016, and one on anti-Gypsyism, 2020. Given the fact that, especially during the pandemic, but already before, we have seen a lot of Holocaust distortion, especially in the social networks worldwide, and the decreasing knowledge about the Holocaust. One of our goals during the presidency also was to fight Holocaust distortion with the help of the definition, but also with the help of establishing a global task force against Holocaust distortion. The task force has been prepared by IHRA experts during the last 8-9 months. It will be launched on 27th of January, together with the United Nations and the UNESCO in, well, we guess it will be a virtual event. And during 2021, 2022, we would like to launch an implementation campaign and also a social media campaign to fight Holocaust distortion. This is important also in the fight against anti-Semitism, because distortion quite often prepares the ground for open anti-Semitism. So it is important to fight also this plague. We have also adopted as the IHRA a common statement on rehabilitation. We see in some countries a tendency, and that is not restricted to Eastern Europe, we can see it in many countries, a tendency to rehabilitate historic figures who had a role in the Holocaust as perpetrators. And in order to shed a light on this phenomenon, and also to have an instrument to discuss it further, to detect it, to have early action on it, the IHRA has passed in its Berlin plenary a declaration on rehabilitation. And then we have fourth point and last point. We have continued a work that was completed under the previous Luxembourg presidency, which is to disseminate the recommendations on teaching and learning about the Holocaust. We now have, they were written in English, but we already have 8 translations at hand, including German, but also including Turkish or Macedonian or Croatian, and 50 more are in the pipeline. So pretty soon we're going to have the recommendations available in all the IHRA languages, or languages of the IHRA countries. And these are an important instrument, state-of-the-art instrument to explain how you can teach the Holocaust today.
Thanks. I'd like to follow up with the Holocaust distortion, which I think is a particularly dangerous nuance of Holocaust denial, I guess, in terms of not outright denial, but changing the facts. In a perhaps a more trivial example, I read in the last week or so how the Google Home Assistant Alexa was obviously was picking up on some Holocaust distortion, and was saying things like, if you asked about the Holocaust, Alexa would respond, a deliberate Jewish conspiracy to abuse the interests of Jews at the expense of others. So I think it happens in many cases. Dina, I was wondering, from your perspective, being
Yes.
based in Israel, how do you view this phenomenon?
Well, let me say this. We are trying, first of all, we are trying our best with the help of some new technological inventions to monitor anti-Semitism. We've been doing it in Tel Aviv University since 1992 worldwide. Since then, it of course has changed. And so our ways of monitoring and activity have changed accordingly. And what you were asking for is, in fact, how do we look at the social media anti-Semitism? And I must say that this presents quite a problem. It presents quite a problem because, and we are now trying to tackle it from another point, and this is from the legal point of view. I'm sure Michaela knows about it better. Katharina von Schnurbein from the EU, the coordinator on anti-Semitism in the EU, has approached 2-3 years ago the main servers, Google and Facebook, etc., in order to have them take off whatever is brought to their attention as an anti-Semitic post, as distortion of the Holocaust, etc. Okay, it started working, but recently Facebook was under, I would say, a storm that was organized. We supported it, of course, of some 150 organizations who appealed to, especially Facebook, where most of the were not most, but Twitter is also, but many of these posts were found, so that they changed their policy. And they agreed immediately to change policy. But I'd like to add to this something else. And this is that you have the big servers, you have a problem of anti-Semitism. You definitely have, if you allow me to say so, a more severe problem during the pandemic because of accusations against Jews and Israelis that it was all orchestrated by us so that we will find quickly a vaccination, a medicine, and have an enormous profit. And if you pay attention indeed, the people at the head of Pfizer, Moderna, etc., are all either Jews or ex-Israelis. And so this accusation goes on.
I think,
it is, please.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's an interesting point in terms of, especially with Holocaust denial and Holocaust distortion and the propagation of these lies, effectively, about what's happened. I guess to an extent, they only resonate because in the person hearing the message, there's some kernel of truth that resonates with them, you know, a mistruth, but in terms of the person hearing it, some sort of truth. And, you know, I think clearly it's the kind of insidious evil that we need to fight on all fronts, and legal obviously being one of them. Here where I'm based in Melbourne and Victoria, our state government just in the last week or so announced that it was going to make it mandatory that in all our state schools here that Holocaust would be taught to students in year 9 and 10. So that's about 14, 15-year-olds. And I was wondering if both of you could reflect on, you know, as opposed to the legal avenues or have you, what role is there for education in terms of, dismissing or working against these phenomena of distortion and denial?
Okay, so would you like me to continue or?
Yeah, sure. I can see that Michaela is also wanting to make a contribution.
So just to finish my point, you were asking about distortions on the social media. A main problem now is that you don't have only the servers, the known servers. You have what is called the dark net. The dark net is where extremist groups are having their sites and where anti-Semitism and Holocaust distortion are much more extreme and severe and expressed in much worse expressions. And there you have almost no tools, certainly not legal ones, to try to come to them, to try to find them, monitor, and try to apply some legal means. So this darknet is now of main concern. And I will end your first question by saying that the working definition of anti-Semitism, about which I guess we will speak immediately, is definitely a tool, a non-legally binding tool, but a tool that can work against the known social media and less against the dark net, which is a problem.
Michaela, what are your reflections?
Well, let me perhaps give some examples of recent Holocaust distortion, which we identified. For instance, here in Germany, we have had quite a strong movement. It's a small minority, but they were out on the street against Corona restricting measures. And during the first demonstrations against Corona restricting measures, people were out on the street wearing on their arms, on their sleeves, a yellow star saying non-vaccinated. That's a clear case of Holocaust distortion in the sense of the definition of the IHRA. Or you can hear young people speak about the climate Holocaust. What they want to say is climate change is an urgent issue and we must tackle it. But they use the term Holocaust, and this is not acceptable. This is Holocaust distortion. It makes the Holocaust, which was the greatest catastrophe in mankind, smaller than it was indeed. So these are some recent examples, and I think what is important. You asked for the role of education. What is education is important in that, not only at schools, but also during a whole lifetime to raise awareness about the fact that the Holocaust cannot be compared to other genocides or to other phenomena which we see today as severe as they may be. It is a standalone event in history. And so I think there is an important role for education. But there's also an important role for policymakers to address these issues. And that's why the IHRA, and with the help of the German presidency, has launched this campaign for a global task force on Holocaust distortion. And I'm so glad that Australia has become a member of the IHRA last year. So we will span almost globally from Australia to Canada, including most of Europe, with this effort to fight Holocaust distortion.
Yeah, and it is good that Australia has joined. Obviously, we have work to do for Australia to adopt the working definition, but we'll get onto that shortly. I just want to. I'm just reflecting on your comments a bit earlier, Ambassador Kushla, about the uniqueness of the Holocaust in terms of it being a standalone event. In that context, how does the work on the anti-gypsyism that IHRA has also advanced, how does that fit in within that context?
Well, the Holocaust was a genocide, and the genocide of the Sinti and Roma was also a genocide. There are differences. I think, Dina, you're better placed to explain the differences. Yehuda Bauer, who is our honorary president, he is always giving, he's always very open to explain what the differences are. But we can see today that the genocide of the Sinti and Roma has effects still until today, because it was a long neglected genocide. Nobody spoke about it. Some measures were still in place after the war against Sinti and Roma, like, for instance, well, in theory, there was a law that would allow them to settle wherever they wanted to. In practice, they were allowed 1 or 2 days and then sent off again, which contributed to this image they already had as a wandering tribe or so. And so there are still effects of this genocide of the Sinti and Roma, which we can see today. And the IHRA pledged in its ministerial declaration of January 2020, shortly before the Holocaust Memorial Day, to address this issue. And that's what we did with the definition, which addresses some of the major appearances of anti-Gypsyism.
Dina, I was wondering, just to change the subject a little, or change, well, the subject remains the same, but I guess the perspective a bit different. I'm always surprised when I see statistics that talk about how anti-Semitism is increasing around the world, and I'm always surprised in where we live, where we pretty much have a fairly tolerant and accepting society. Even here, those numbers go up. I was wondering what you thought was what's driving that, do you think, in a global sense? Is there some sort of global trend that is driving this increase in anti-Semitism that we're seeing?
Yeah. Well, I'll answer your question in a minute. Let me just refer to what Michaela said about the uniqueness of the Holocaust. And just to round up a bit this point, to say that indeed the debate about the Holocaust being unique is a debate that is sometimes a stormy one that is going on, especially among academics and among scholars who research genocides, because they say, okay, the Holocaust was certainly a genocide, but it is part of, it's an extreme one, but it is part of the chain of genocides that have been perpetrated before the Holocaust and after. By we, I mean those, and especially in Yad Vashem, who think it is unique. We say that it had some unique features. Its totality, it's the industrial destruction and extermination, the lack of any reason, chasing every Jew everywhere, etc., seeing us as a symbol. All these together make the Holocaust unique and are not to be found, all of them together, in other genocides, okay? Other genocide perpetrated after the Holocaust took some elements from it as a model, as an example, as an inspiration with many quotation marks, but they are not the same, okay? And I think this is our definition. Characteristics that are only for the Holocaust, they don't appear together in any other genocide, though it is a genocide, and it inspired or guided others. Now, to your very major question, why do we see, or major and basic question, why do we see now, and now I mean in the 2 last years, though the surge in anti-Semitism in the United States, in France, that stand up in this scene, has taken place, this resurgence, during the last, I would say, 4 or 5 years, where numbers go up, violent cases increase, but the last year or 2 were the worst. And if you ask me to humbly offer an explanation, then I would say the following, that once there is a crisis, and the crisis in democracies, and the crisis is to be seen in France and the United States and other places, then into the crisis, or because of it, extremist groups are more active, are looking for explanations, and thereby anti-Semitism rises. The pandemic it causes fear and anxiety. People are looking for explanations. Old prejudices come up. Many opinions, insinuations, etc., that were down on a lower level before, come up now, because there is fear, there is anxiety, there is need for explanation. What is going on in this crazy world? And as such, as an explanation, Jews has served along history and with the centuries, the reasons for the image of the Jew have piled one upon the other and created an image of the Jew that is there. Why, let me, with one more sentence, why is it that easily Jews and Israelis were accused of orchestrating the virus and spreading it around? Why did it catch so easily? How about the Chinese? How about other possible culprits? Because you already have the image of the Jew as illness spreader from Egypt, where we were expelled because we were lepers, Middle Ages, the Black Plague, the doctor's trials, etc., etc. You have a ready-made image. And this is why in such times it goes up.
Michaela, do you have a similar perspective on the spread of anti-Semitism? You're on mute, Michaela.
Yes, I totally agree. I think it's all about scapegoating, finding someone who is responsible. I mean, we have even the phenomenon that that Jews are being made responsible for profiting from the virus because they invest in the pharmaceutical industry, and they will profit from from the vaccination because they will earn money with the vaccination. Though I think it's about scapegoating, and that's not only towards Jews. It's towards Jews, but it's also towards Roma. At least here in Europe, where Roma were made responsible for spreading the virus through Europe, because many Roma, they don't work in their countries of origin where they can't find work. They work in countries like Italy or also in Germany, and they were made responsible for spreading the virus. So I think it's all about scapegoating. Yeah.
Well, I guess this growing phenomenon, or this increasing anti-Semitism, makes it even more timely that the work of IHRA in creating, or perhaps creating isn't the right word, but doing the work to produce the working definition of anti-Semitism becomes even more important. But I note that there are 33 countries that are members of IHRA, if I'm not mistaken, but less that have actually adopted the working definition. So, well, I was wondering.
18.
18, right.
18 have adopted it, and some more apply it without having adopted it.
Right. So, I would, well, firstly, I mean.
Oh, sorry.
No,
18
go on, Dina.
in the IHRA.
Yes.
Yeah, but there are many others outside.
Yes.
So it's a bit of an uneven landscape in that sense, in terms of the adoption and what have you, and the membership of IHRA. So I was wondering, why do you think that is? Is it a journey that some countries are going on? Is it are there other issues that are around that?
Yeah, maybe it takes some time for some countries before they adopt it. For some countries, for instance, it was difficult to deal with the non-legally binding character of the definition. They said we either have declarations or we have in our system, we have laws. but we don't have something in between, which is a definition, but it's non-legally binding. So that was difficult. Some also had political problems with the examples, but which could be overcome. And then they adopted it. But I think, well, last week during the IHRA plenary, we had a very fruitful discussion about the use of the IHRA working definition on anti-Semitism, there was no delegation which participated in the discussion, and some of them who participated had been critical in the past, who didn't recognize that the definition is a very good tool to raise awareness, to identify anti-Semitism, a very useful tool for law enforcement bodies, for the legal system as such. So that was really overwhelming to see in the IHRA membership how much appreciated this definition is. And we, as the European Commission, under the guidance of Katharina von Schnurbein, and together with the Federal Foreign Office, with the German presidency of the EU, we will publish next week a handbook which shows how the IHRA definition can be used. It's a manual on the use or on the implementation of the IHRA working definition, which will be available for all European member states. But of course, since it will be online for everybody else, it will show best practices, it will show examples of how you can use it. It's based on a study, on a questionnaire to all European member states, so to 27 member states, on how they use the IHRA working definition. And I think this will help others who have not yet adopted the working definition to be better informed and to adopt it too in the future.
Well, I was wondering, just in terms of those who haven't yet adopted it, and my country is one of them, as president of IHRA, Ambassador Kushla, is that something that you are planning to approach our government about in terms of asking them to consider adopting it or suggesting that they do?
Well, that is, if you are a member of IHRA, that should be self-understood. So, yeah.
May I add?
Sure,
I add
Dina.
That? Thank you, Michaela. And I think the more you are speaking, the more we see the importance of the IHRA and the importance of your work and the achievements, and really all congratulations. But let me add the following. The working definition of anti-Semitism has become a phenomenon. It has become an international matter. And let me explain why. First of all, it is not adopted municipalities, by football teams, such as Dortmund in Germany and in Buenos Aires. It has been adopted by universities, by churches, Church of England, Church of Wales, universities like Manchester, Cambridge, Boston. So it is a phenomenon that goes far beyond countries, okay? It goes down deeper than the level of countries. Right now we are mapping, we are trying to map where was it really adopted, and we are astonished. We are astonished to see how many places this has been adopted, although it is a non-legally binding document. Now, why has it become a phenomenon? Because, first of all, the first adoption of the working definition happened in 2005. After Germany had a major conference deciding that we need a definition in 2004. 2005, this definition came into being. And so that when the IHRA adopted it, it was already some good 11 years around. So it was easier to know it. it has become a phenomenon, I think, because of two reasons. One is that once you adopt it, and here, Yossi, perhaps this is a hint for the Australian government or the appropriate ministry. Once you adopt it, you sort of declare on which side you are. Is that you are on the side of fighting an old evil like anti-Semitism, but also other evils. A football team. Why anti-Semitism and the working definition of anti-Semitism? Because they have racism in the football teams, and they would like to take the definition as an example and work with it, not only on anti-Semitism, but on racism in general. So it has a value from the point of view of values and of saying, where are you? Now, it causes debate. And let us not shy away from saying clearly and openly that the 4 points in the definition by which anti-Zionism is actually defined as anti-Semitism cause a lot of debate, and you, Michaela, referred to it. Now, when there is a debate, for instance, the famous debate on a very high level took place in the French Parliament. Okay, for a number of days, they argued back and forth, and then they decided, no, they will adopt, because as President, Zionism is sometimes definitely anti-Semitic. And in other places as well, Emmanuel Valls said it, many others said it. The German parliament decided against the BDS. So when there is a debate, all issues are on the table. And the issue of anti-Semitism, of anti-Zionism, of the fight against racism, it comes to center stage as a major issue. And then it has a value because all these questions are opened. And despite the debate, the process of adopting goes on. It goes on. The recent ones were Albania, Kosovo, University of Cambridge, these universities and football teams in Argentina. It goes on, and there is a statement here. There is a statement in favor of fighting anti-Semitism, in favor of understanding what a problem this causes for society, for public order, and what an example you can take from the working definition to tackle other problems. It is not a coincidence that the IHRA has now a definition of anti-Gypsyism. It first had in 2016 the working definition against anti-Semitism, but work went on, and the working definition against anti-Semitism inspired another definition against Gypsyism.
And that is a wonderful take from that. And we're about to go to audience questions, but before we do, I'd just like to spend a moment or two looking at some of the criticisms of the working definition that are abound. And it doesn't take a lot of skill to do a quick Google search to see where those criticisms lie. And you know, two areas that in which are obviously apparent. One is, you know, the accusation that it conflates anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism and doesn't allow for criticism of Israel. And another one being that it's, you know, a little bit convoluted and maybe just a simpler definition about hatred of Jews would be sufficient. Before we go to questions from the audience in a minute or two, Michaela, do you have any, what's your response to those criticisms?
Yeah, well, the definition is a tool. It's a tool that has been adopted to guide the IHRA in its work. And as soon as it had been adopted, countries started adopting it. The UK being the first, as early, I think, as the end of 2016 or in early 2017, and Germany also was very early in 2017 to adopt it. They have already started also to implement it, to use it. The criticism mostly comes saying, well, this definition does not allow to criticize Israeli politics, Israeli policy. It's against free speech. And it's simple to counter this criticism because you just have to look into the definition, and the definition clearly states any criticism of Israel which is comparable to the criticism of another country is not excluded or is not being considered as being anti-Semitic. So you just have to really read the definition and find out what it says. So that is one of the criticisms that comes mostly from rather left-wing groups. I have seen in the Q&A section that there was a question about whether anti-Semitism in Europe is mostly left-wing or rather right-wing. I don't have the evidence about other European countries, but speaking for my own country, more than 90% of anti-Semitic acts which are recorded by the police are being committed by right-wing extremists or by right-wing people. About 4% is contributed to Muslims, and a very small 4% to the left wing, and a very small amount to Muslim extremist anti-Semitism. So I can't answer the question for the whole of Europe, but I think it would be comparable, maybe not so clear, 94 to 3 or so, but rather right than left.
It's interesting that that 90-10 split is interesting and almost a little bit counterintuitive, because I think I'm not disputing the statistics, but it feels sometimes that the anti-Semitism that originates on the left side is somehow more vociferous and more venal and just it seems to be more despicable if one can even say something like that. And I've often reflected that there's a little bit of irony there as well, because on that general, and it's so awful to generalize, and maybe you'll have a working definition against generalizations, but until you do, the left, that broad grouping that has also seen this cancel culture emerge in a global as a global trend. And to me, it seems like you've got the same group of people saying we must cancel all these things that are redolent of racism and historical injustices, and you've got the same people saying except for the definition of anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts, Dina?
Well, and Michaela is quite right. It says right there that any criticism comparable to criticism against any other country, a normal criticism, is okay. What are we citizens of Israel busy doing morning to night, criticizing the policies of our government? So, but the point is that it is not a violation of freedom of speech, because it is a non-legally binding document. You can say what you like, and I will not be able to take you to court or to punish you in any way. I can educate against, I will go against it in the media. I will try to legislate if the country where it was said has a law against hate speech, etc. But the definition per se does not prevent you from saying from saying what you like. One more point is, you spoke about the left. It is very interesting to note that those who oppose the definition on the grounds of these 4 points, where anti-Zionism is defined as anti-Semitism, are exactly those who criticize Israel in many severe and sometimes very unjust ways that have no connection to reality. It has a connection to what they think of Jews and Israel, but not of what they are. You know what, if you allow me one sentence, what is a short definition of anti-Semitism? Anti-Semitism is the discrepancy between what Jews are, and the Israeli Jews included, and what the anti-Semitic imagination think they are. Okay? That's anti-Semitism. And here it works as well.
We have a question that's come in from John Zalesnikov, who's typed it in, and I'll just take the opportunity to remind the people watching with us, the well over 100 people who are watching with us this evening, that you can either type in a question yourself through the Q&A function or digitally raise your hand and we'll be able to pick you out. But John, I don't know if you had a chance to read this, Michaela and Dina, but he says, I'm sure this question will be answered, but how can we distinguish between a legitimate criticism of Israeli governments and anti-Semitism? Further, to what extent are nationalist governments such as Hungary and Poland anti-Semitic, even though they may be pro-Israel?
Well, I think the first question already has been answered, because criticism of Israel is possible under the definition. It's clearly stated there.
But how do we distinguish between? I mean, yes, I understand that criticism of Israel is allowed. How do you distinguish? When does it cross the line? How? What are the red lines there?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's when you start bringing in, when it's not comparable to the criticism of another government, if you say, yes, Israeli government does it because they're all Jewish and the Jews are blah, blah, blah. So that's what makes it anti-Semitic, when you bring in this element of belonging to a group of people, and that's why you act as you act. So that's what makes it different from criticism of other governments. Yeah.
May I give an example? I'd like to give an example. I think Michaela is quite right, but let me add, when does it cross the line to anti-Semitism? When it uses clearly recognized or old-time recognized anti-Semitic tropes and symbols and expressions. And I'll give you an example. You all remember the Marmara, this little ship that was on its way to Gaza, and the Israeli Navy overtook it, etc. It was a whole trouble, international trouble for a long time. Now, what is criticism that is acceptable, of course, like the one level that any other country? When you say that a certain event, at a certain time, at a certain place, you don't agree with and you criticize. What can I say? More than half of the population of Israel will agree with you immediately. But if you say, and it has been said, the Jewish soldiers, not Israeli, the Jewish soldiers went up on the ship with murderous intentions. They were all brought up on the knees of the Bible, where they have a vengeful God, and where they have been taught long centuries ago to kill, This is anti-Semitism, pure and open, because once you attribute characteristics that are known as anti-Semitic to a group, in this case, Israel, this is anti-Semitism. So it is possible, definitely, we have to have a line between criticism of the today and now that I don't agree with, and between this and attributing characteristics that are definitely anti-Semitic. Definitely. And when you deny the Holocaust and when you compare to Nazis, Michaela mentioned a few examples of when the pandemic is connected to the Holocaust, and this is really disturbing, this yellow star and the unvaccinated and being closed at home as if you were in the ghettos. The Holocaust is a symbol of the worst, and the Nazism of the worst evil. And when you want to compare to something that you now are troubled with, and you think is the worst, you compare to the Holocaust. But it is definitely not to be done. So there is, I think you definitely can find a line.
I just want to go back to the thread of conversation we were having before about left-wing anti-Semitism versus right-wing anti-Semitism, because there was an interesting comment in the comments from Andre Obler, but where he said that the anti-Semitism on the left causes more concern for many because it is more readily accepted by well-meaning people across society. In other words, the impact is perhaps greater as opposed to a group of neo-Nazis who might do some dreadful physical damage when people recognise them as on the extreme. And indeed, Australia's foreign minister, speaking to one of the roof bodies here in the community, the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, just in last week, talked about the insidious creep of anti-Semitism cloaked in the language of human rights. How does the working definition help counter that? And how much does it sort of give license to further criticism?
Well, let me first say there is no good anti-Semitism, be it left, sure, right, or Muslim, which are the main sources for anti-Semitism. They're all to be condemned. I think Andrea Obola is right to say that the left-wing anti-Semitism is more easily accepted. It's, if you want, the more modern anti-Semitism. And that's why in the definition also, this form of anti-Semitism is given much more room in the examples than any other form of anti-Semitism. If I'm right, 7 out of 11 examples given in the working definition relate to Israeli motivated anti-Semitism. So we have different forms of anti-Semitism which need to be addressed differently. And I think the first and most important thing is first identified and then stand up and speak out against it. Yeah, that's what you can do when you sit at a table with your, well, it's not so common these days anymore, but when you sit with your friends somewhere and someone gives an anti-Semitic statement, then you start asking, who has, where do you have this information from? Do you really think this is something that is correct? I don't think you should say that. So stand up, speak out about it. And I very much hope that our handbook will give some very good examples which will make it easier to apply the working definition.
May I add to that? I think, Michaela, you now touched upon a very important point when you said that when you argue with someone, you ask him where did he get or she the information from. Mm-hmm. And I think you touched upon a very important point, and this is ignorance. There is rampant ignorance among perhaps not the former generation that knew World War II, but later generations definitely And the recent ones, the ones today, there is rampant anti-Semitism. The IHRA does a lot to educate and to support education, but there is still so much more to do. Sometimes you see a demonstration with plaques, you interview people, they have no idea where Israel is on the map, where Gaza is on the map, what is it all about, who were the Nazis, what did they do, but with the help of a little telephone, a little cellular, they are all out shouting with plaques and slogans, but they don't know. It doesn't come from any basis of knowledge or analysis. And I think that's a major worldwide point to be taken into consideration.
I might just
asked about Poland and Hungary was not answered yet. Is it true?
Is what? Would you like to answer it, Dina?
Question about why Hungary and Poland are good friends of Israel and are so anti-Semitic on the other side.
What's your thoughts on that, Dina?
Well, these are countries that are national. Nationalism there is their main tenant, and they see Israel as a national country, not as post-colonial, leftist post-colonial would like nationalism to go away, but it doesn't go away. Nations don't go away and the symbols don't go away. So these countries see Israel as a model of nationalism, and they unfortunately distinguish between Israelis and Jews. But we don't want such a distinction. We are Jews, and we share the fate of Jews everywhere, and we wouldn't like to be seen as Israelis different only. We are definitely part of the Jewish people.
Just changing, asking a bit of a left field question that's come in. Can there be a Jewish anti-Semite? Ambassador Kushla, maybe you'd like to answer that first.
That's a difficult question to answer. I would cite Yehuda Bauer to be on the safe side. He says, yes, there are Jewish anti-Semites.
Right. Dina, do you have any thoughts on that?
There are definitely Jewish anti-Zionists.
Yes.
On the eve of the war, of World War II, only 10% of the Jewish people were Zionists, were registered in the Zionist organization. Only 10%. And the others were Bundist, communist, autonomists, territorialists, socialists, whatever. Okay? After the war, these all were gone, all these ideologies, and suddenly Zionism offered a solution. But within the Jewish people, until today, the Orthodox, for instance, are definitely anti-Zionist. They live in Jerusalem, but they don't accept the authority of the state.
So are they under the working definition anti-Semite?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so, because this is an internal Jewish debate. On the other hand, if leftist American professor in a university somewhere in the West says exactly what his colleagues are saying about Israel in a very anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic way, yes, it is a Jew using anti-Semitic tropes. Yes, I agree with Michaela.
I'd just like to thank Harriet Warlow-Schill, who's been putting comments in through the panel, and Harriet just asked us to clarify that it's not all Orthodox people, and obviously we're talking about some of the ultra-Orthodox community and not entirely all Orthodox Jews. We have received a question from Sam Zaltzman, which I'm about to ask, but I'll just also remind our audience that we will be wrapping up shortly. So if there's a question that you've been thinking, should I ask, shouldn't I ask, now is the time. But Sam Zaltzman wrote that in August 2020, 124 Jewish organizations globally signed a petition urging Facebook to adopt the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism. Yes. To date, Facebook hasn't adopted that definition, even though It's revised its policy standards on hate speech, misinformation and disinformation. What do you believe must be done in order to persuade Facebook, and let's not just put one multi-billion-dollar social media company in the spotlight, but I'm sure there are others. What must be done in order to persuade social media giants, these massive influencers of public opinion nowadays? How do we persuade them to adopt the definition, the working definition? Ambassador Kushla,
Well, I think,
do you have any thoughts on that?
I think, well, I think some important work has already been done by convincing Facebook to put down posts which spread Holocaust denial or Holocaust, mostly it's Holocaust distortion. And this was hard work already. So there is a lot of more hard work on the way. I mean, the usual instruments we have at hand are social media campaigns, are speaking with the responsibles at Facebook and setting good examples. So if more and more companies, also big companies, start adopting the IHRA working definition, I think that will set a good example and hopefully start a process of rethinking the policy that has been followed by Facebook. But maybe someone who is listening has a good idea to convince Facebook. If you have, I will volunteer to get in touch with Facebook and try it. Yeah.
Dina,
yes, may I add that first of all, hi Sam. I know him for many years. Hi, how are you? But I'd like to add the following. Facebook did not adopt the definition, although these many organizations that we gathered appealed to it very forcefully to do so. Why didn't they? Because a short time after the appeal of these 150 or so organizations to Facebook, there was another letter of some 50-something scholars, professors, etc., urging Facebook not to adopt it. And so, because, especially on this anti-Zionist grounds, and so Facebook decided not to enter this debate. These say yes and the others say no, not to adopt, but to change their policy towards anti-Semitic posts on their web. So this was their compromise. It doesn't mean that they don't do. They're not working now against anti-Semitic posts. They are, but they did not decided so far not to adopt the working definition. Yep.
Okay, we are coming towards the end, but there's a couple of good questions that have been coming in. Goldie Birch asks, how can we boost the study of the Holocaust in school curriculums worldwide?
I didn't understand the question.
So,
can you?
How do we boost the study of the Holocaust in school curricula worldwide? Ambassador Kushla?
Well, first of all IHRA member states, before they are able to become member states, they have to have Holocaust education in their curricula, firstly. Secondly, the UNESCO is working together with the IHRA on the recommendations for teaching and learning about the Holocaust. And the UNESCO is a global organization. They took these recommendations and actually they made out of the recommendations a curriculum which could be applied in schools. So it's available to all the members of the UNESCO, which is mostly. So we since anti-Semitism and Holocaust remembrance should be recognized globally, we need also global cooperation and global organizations which are already there to promote Holocaust education in schools. And I think the UNESCO can play a very good role in doing so.
May I add a thought? I hope you will accept it. Of course, and the IHRA is doing a terrific job in this direction. When you speak to children, non-Jewish children all over, and you start speaking to them about the Holocaust, there are, according to a very good survey done in Sweden and in the framework of the IHRA, there was a very good survey in Sweden and in other places, children start asking, okay, why the Jews? What's wrong with them? Why should they have been killed and not someone else? Basic questions. You mentioned Yehuda Bauer, who always says, why the Jews and not all the red-haired people whose number of the shoe is 38? I think that perhaps an idealistic but good way to go about teaching the Holocaust would be to combine teaching of the history of the Holocaust with teaching of the history of the Jewish people, its traditions, its treasures, its contribution to world culture. Because then you understand much better why the Jews. And you understand better the Nazi ideology that went against everything that was Jewish and that was invented by Jews. I think what we miss in education is teaching about the Jewish people. In a class in Germany, Michaela, I'm sure you know about the recent survey in schools in Germany and what's going on there. When teachers cannot teach about the Holocaust because they have Muslim students in class. And there are Christian, Jew, a bit of Jews and Muslims all in one class. And one knows nothing about the other. Anti-Semitism is, ignorance is rampant among the three of them totally. So teaching Jewish and Christian children about Islam, Christian and Muslim Jewish students about Judaism, and making them open to what the other is, what the traditions are, I think it may change the results of teaching the Holocaust too.
We'll just take the last question, I think, because I know that Dina, especially, you need to go shortly. But this comes from Anna Berger, and I guess it's, when you create a working definition that is ultimately words on paper, then people will come in and talk about the semantics of that definition as well. But I think the question will hopefully provoke a little bit of discussion before we finish off. And she asks, Anna Berger, given that language can be a powerful tool, perhaps we should be calling it anti-Jewish racism rather than anti-Semitism. Racism is unacceptable while anti-Semitism has some acceptance in some quarters. Michaela, Kushla, what do you think about that?
That's the first time I hear this idea. It seems to be attractive, but well, it's a bit difficult for me to answer because I'm not Jewish and the IHRA is not a Jewish organization. So I think this should be a discussion that should be, well, if you would like to start, that should be driven within the Jewish communities to find out whether this wouldn't be a better way of framing the issue of delegitimizing, discriminating against Jews and having prejudices about Jews. But well, when I read it here, to me it seems quite convincing.
Dina, what are your thoughts?
That's a very personal.
Sure.
There is I think the question falls right in time, because right now there is a debate raging over the pages of the Israeli daily Haaretz about should you use the term anti-Semitism or should we replace it by another one. I'm not sure that the lady who asked the question knows about Haaretz and reads it, but this is a debate in which some, I would say, we 5, 6 scholars are involved, and Bauer says, I don't care if you call this a carpet. As long as the expression is there, it has caught up, and everyone understands what it is for so many centuries. Now go replace it with another one, even if the other one is perhaps better. And you, Michaela, agreed that it caught with you. And the suggestion was to replace anti-Semitism with anti-Judaism, okay, which is a bit wider and not racial and not against Semites. The Arabs are also Semites and many others are. So it's a problematic expression, no doubt. But the debate was not decided upon.
No.
And we all know that anti-Semitism is the catchy expression. Elie Wiesel said, I have to change the term Holocaust. I have to change it. Everyone has a Holocaust. Everyone thinks he had a Holocaust. It is too much in use. I have to invent another one. But again, you have to take into consideration how deeply seated an expression is.
It's an interesting question, isn't it? And I guess reflecting back into the working definition, if the working definition says that anti-Semitism is, or amongst other things, is the denial of Jewish self-determination, then surely then the Jewish people should be able to choose what term would be best used for anti-Semitism. But that's probably for another day, and we are fast running out of time. So firstly, let me say I apologize to all the people watching who have put in questions that we haven't been able to get to. You'd appreciate that we had many more questions than we had the time to answer. And before we hand back to Ron Gerstenfeld from the Embassy of Israel, maybe just a minute from each of you on your reflections on this topic and any other thoughts you wish to share. Dina, perhaps we'll start with you.
Okay. Sorry?
Sorry, just as we're just about to wrap up, I just thought I'd give both you and Michaela a minute to just, to give us any last thoughts that you felt important to share.
Okay. Thank you for giving us the opportunity for wrapping up and saying a final, well, not final, as you said, we could have gone on and on. These are questions that touch upon each of us deeply. I would say the following, that in this discussion, we pinpointed problems, and the pinpointing the problems make us again and again realize how much work we still have to do, and with the help of international organizations, of education, media, legislation, every means that we will be able to use. And I will end by saying that we shouldn't really work only on anti-Semitism and tackling anti-Semitism, but to work in coalition with other minorities, with other persecuted minorities or discriminated against, and make it understood as far and wide as possible that this is part of a much larger human problem of looking at the other and the different.
Thank you, Dina.
And I want to thank you for this interesting panel.
Thank you. Michaela?
Well, it's very difficult to speak after Dina. I couldn't agree more with what she said. I would like to thank you, the Israeli and the German embassy, too, for having organized this meeting. I think it was a very interesting discussion. I'm following right now the chat about the correct spelling of anti-Semitism. I think that's also on the to-do list, as well as Amazon's Alexa. So there is still a lot of work ahead of us, and it's good to know that so many people are supporting these efforts, and that Australia as a country is supporting these efforts. So thank you very much once again, also for the public to have attended for 1.5 hours almost in a great number. I think that's a great achievement. Thank you, everybody.
Yep.
Thank you.
And before we hand over to Ron, I'd like to thank both of you. I think it's been an extraordinarily illuminating discussion with much more food for thought. And I think it's much better to end as we have, with so many other questions that have created so many other questions, and to make sure that people maintain this strong interest in this clear topic. Here in Melbourne, it's just about to get dark. It's a good time to end, because tonight is also the first night of Hanukkah, and we will be. I know my kids are waiting patiently to light the candles, but I also think to eat the ice cream that I got them as a treat. But I think it's Hanukkah, we celebrate the festival of light, and we can now shed, we've been able to shed some light onto this problem, and that we do know that anti-Semitism, if anti-Semitism is the darkness, then the light is, amongst other things, Jewish continuity and continuing to make our voices heard. Thank you again to both of you, to the panel. Thank you. I'm going to just hand over to Ron Gerstenfeld from the Embassy of Israel, who, together with the German Embassy, have made this evening possible. Ron.
Thank you very much, Yossi. Indeed, it was an inspiring discussion and conversation. I'm very happy personally to see that two such important and inspiring women are standing in the forefront of the combat against anti-Semitism, which is so important. I would like to mention that Australia is doing a remarkable job fighting anti-Semitism. We can see it. Yossi, you has mentioned the decision of the Victorian state government to include, or let's say, obligatory education of the Holocaust in high schools in Victoria. We recently saw the establishment of a Holocaust museum in Adelaide and in Brisbane. We see a fruit to this, let's say, this combat, because we recently read the report of the ECHRA regarding anti-Semitism, and we saw an important decrease of anti-Semitic acts. There's still a lot of work to be done. There's still a lot of things to do, but we are in a good situation here in Australia. And thank you very much, Zionist Federation, German Embassy, and of course, Ambassador Kushla and Professor Porat. Really inspiring. Thank you very much, and have a good night and happy Hanukkah.
Thank you.